I am being watched. Welcome everyone to Mail Plus TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Person of Interest Season 2, Episode 14. It's called 1%. So, spoilers for the episode as always. This one guest stars Jimmy Simpson as a eccentric, kind of annoying billionaire. I say kind of because I don't actually find him that annoying, but he does have these little quirks that are definitely annoying on their own, like always saying bitches at the end of a sentence when he's leaving, or trash talking during basketball, or whatever else. But the gimmick of this episode, which is a pretty typical episode, and I kind of guessed that was coming because we'd had like three in a row that were very serialized and very much evolving a lot of the things we've been doing, because we just got Reese back, completely back properly from both prison and then everything that was happening with Stanton last episode. It made sense to me that we'd get a traditional as a person, as a number, and we're going to protect them. But that's not to say that there's not its own little twist on the formula, because, one of the things I've always praised about this show is how it keeps shaking that up. And here the gimmick is that it's a super rich person who Reese can't quite just keep up with in the way that he normally would when he's tailing someone else, because he's super rich and does not adhere to any kind of schedule. He just kind of does what he wants when he wants. He will suddenly just call in a helicopter and fly away, so Reese can't easily follow him. And I will say, this show rarely has to bother doing like a sort of obvious CG effect. The helicopter, which is just a quick little moment of it flying away, did look pretty rough. So luckily the show doesn't really rely on that too often, but I thought I'd mention it at the very least. But that's very much the gimmick. So about a third or so into the episode, Reese just decides, I can't use the same tactics with this guy. I have to just do something different. And that something different ends up being just going into his office and making it clear, you're in trouble. You're going to be dead if I don't get to protect you for the next 48 hours or whatever. And this actually excites our character, our billionaire, because what's his name? Logan Pierce. He is, he thinks everything's boring. He thinks other one percenters are boring. Earlier on, when Reese was still trying to play it coy and just blend in, and he goes to this fancy auction, when the billionaire tries to talk to him, Reese says something Finch tells him to say about stocks or whatever, and Pierce just goes, "Oh, you're boring. I'll just go away then." He's actually like, "Oh, I was right. You are interesting. I thought you were interesting, and sure you are." And a big part of this episode is that Pierce is very curious about everything that Reese is doing and wants to know why he's helping him, why he helps people, who the brains of the operation are, sort of questions all these little things. The most showpiece moment of this is the fact that he basically fakes falling asleep. Reese goes to meet Finch, and then it turns out that Pierce has followed Reese so that he can see what's going on, and sees Finch and wonders who he is, and recognizes him even, because by this point in the episode, Finch has also, played a role. He's pretended to be a dry cleaner already. During one of Pierce's many sort of billionaire little shticks that he does, where he just goes to the dry cleaners in his underwear, picks up his suit, and puts it on while he's there. So, needless to say, like this is mostly pretty fun stuff. It felt like a character who was designed to keep our main characters on their toes, and it led to a lot of interesting little beats. There's almost nothing more fun in this show than Reese getting frustrated because he can't just be Reese and something's getting in the way. It's kind of shown early on at the auction when he's still undercover, as it were. He intentionally bids on this fancy item because he just doesn't like that Pierce seems to always get his way and he has to be brought down a peg or two. So he apologizes to Finch effectively and bids $10 million on these, like, it's like a letter written by Einstein or something like that. And the look in Finch's face is pretty funny as well, it has to be said. So, yeah, all this stuff is fun. They end up going to St. Petersburg at one point. The big ultimate thing that it bubbles down to, though, in terms of the of the interactions with Pierce is that Pierce like could have just been honest about a few things, because it turns out by the end that this woman who we thought might be the one who's against him because she has a rival, not company, I've not even explained what he does, so it's hard to just shorthand it. So he got rich by making a social networking site, you know, so he's kind of a Zuckerberg-esque kind of character. And there's this woman who was building a better version of it that he seems to, or it looked like his company had kind of like bought her out so that she couldn't, and maybe she was a likely candidate to want to come after him, because they make a habit of going after smaller startups who might rival them and buying them out and suing them into oblivion and things like that. Kind of nefarious shit. Although there's kind of some hints throughout the episode that it's more his business partner who's like making those choices rather than as Pierce himself. He seems to be a bit more decent as a human being. But it actually turns out that he's working with this woman and he's helping her with her thing because he actually just believes in making the good thing. He believes in helping people connect and actually just working with her and getting away from all the rich people. And it turns out his best friend who started the business with him is the actual one who wants him dead, because if the board of directors get rid of him and they end up doing that by the end of the episode, it means that he can just go and work with anyone else and start a rival thing with this woman. So that's why the best friend wants rid of him. And the lawyer as well seemingly is in on it too. They try and poison him, or, well, poison is maybe not quite the right word. They intentionally dose him with something he's allergic to in his whiskey. There you go. That's more accurate. Anyway, that was a lot of stuff to explain. But basically, he could have told Reese a lot of this stuff that he knew early on in the episode, at least once he trusted him. But he didn't, purely because he just wanted to see how Reese worked. There's a great shot, actually, when they're in St. Petersburg, where Reese kind of ditches him because they think they've dealt with it. They think they've got the culprit, that it was the lawyer, and he's walking out of the club, or the little restaurant that Pierce, and he's invited friends to come and meet him there. And there's a great little shot where Reese walks out, and Pierce is just looking longingly over, like his new best friend has just walked out. It's almost like for the first time in a long time, there's someone in his life that isn't just giving him all the attention that he would expect automatically, and in turn makes Reese a more desirable person to him. It's pretty simple 101 stuff in terms of human psychology, but it feels effective here, and it's almost kind of sweet when Reese shows up to save him later on, because he really feels like he is on his own and he doesn't have anyone to come help him. But anyway, the more interesting stuff with all this, so that was me explaining just Reese interacting with the rich guy for the most part and protecting him, a couple of fight scenes, the usual shtick. There's a set piece where his car gets hacked by someone trying to kill him, and Finch has to hack in himself to like fix it. It's a fun little sequence. One little thing that stuck out to me about that scene though is that I get the impression they might have like completely changed their minds and what all the dialogue was going to be, or maybe they hadn't even decided yet because they didn't know. Maybe they were still researching all the necessary information to actually say the right things for this scene to make sense with how cars work or whatever. I don't know. But I did think it was kind of strange that through all this talking between Reese and Finch, and also Pierce himself, because Pierce calls like the helpline in the car because his car's not responding to him and it won't slow down. So he's saying a lot of stuff over the phone in the car, but we never cut to a shot of inside the car to see his face. It's always just wide shots of the car. And that could be a creative choice, but it felt a bit weirder to me. It felt more like all of these things that he is saying, they didn't know, either they changed their minds in what he should be saying, and they ADR'd it all, so they just had to just not use any of the shots of him inside the car because none of his lip sync would match. Or possibly when they were shooting it, they didn't know what he was going to say yet because they had to do some research about how this stuff works, and they had to make sure he was asking the right things so that Finch didn't sound like an idiot or something. I don't know. It felt like something maybe changed, or they were playing it safe so they could fill in the dialogue later. Not a big deal. Like, I'm not even complaining per se. It's slightly stuck out to me, but nothing major in any way. So Anyway, that's all the sort of set piecey stuff with Reese and the rich guy. That's not the interesting stuff, though. As per usual with person of interest, there's something else bubbling under the surface that's more interesting. And this ties into the flashbacks. And also even ties in maybe a little bit to Bear the dog, who's really sad throughout the episode, and it turns out he just wants a friend, so Finch takes him on a play date with another dog at the end of the episode. It's kind of sweet. But the flashbacks dive back into the Finch and Ingram relationship. And we see a flashback to the day of 9/11, and that Finch didn't even know it happened. He was too busy working, didn't have the TV on, and Harold has to come in. Sorry, I always do this with Ingram. I always call him Harold, even though it's Harold Finch. God damn it. Right, Ingram comes in and says, hey, something's happened. And, you know, it puts on the TV and they watch it in horror. They sort of effectively find the motivation to make the machine by sitting there and drinking on that night kind of thing. And then it skips ahead to 2009. I think it was 2009 anyway. And this is like just as the machine's about to be shipped off. And Ingram's still trying to convince him, hey, there should be a back door, blah, blah, blah. And Finch is like, hey, we can help people in other ways, but, you know, we made this choice. And Ingram says it's the, you know, of all the bad choices we have made over the last 7 years, this is the one I regret the most. And Finch kind of puts down a little bit of an ultimatum. He's like, look, we can move forward together now that we're done with this, or we don't. Basically saying, hey, we can go our separate ways if you're not on board with the decisions that I've made. And it ends in kind of a cold note. So, obviously, we know Finch feels guilty about Ingram. This might be the last time they've spoken to each other. Now, I'm saying might be because it's hard to remember all the specific years for all the flashbacks. They always show us the year. I don't remember if 2009 is the last time we've seen Ingram, or the latest time in the timeline. I'd have to go back and check. But if I'm guessing just based on the context of the scene, this might be the last time they spoke to each other. In fact, the last flashback is Ingram seemingly trying to do what Reese and Finch do now. He goes to a woman who's her number's up, and he's waiting in his car with a gun, and he sees someone walking up behind her, and the scene ends there. We don't get to see the outcome. Perhaps he, you know, my assumption here is that he probably dies trying to protect this woman. Maybe it's not this incident, maybe it's another one, but this seems timeline-wise from memory to link up. But again, impossible to remember every time those years have flashed up on the screen. These flashbacks are alright. They're not the best flashbacks that Ingram and Finch have shared, but what they do in this episode, which I really like, is how they tie into the themes of the main story. And that is, the main story is that these two guys started this company together and are fundamentally having a disagreement about what it should be and sort of the morals of what they've built and what the goals of what they're building are. And that's kind of what's caused the rift, and it's why Jimmy Simpson's character, Pierce, wants to go and do this thing with this other woman, because this networking site that he's going to build with her technology, he believes that'll actually let people really connect and form real relationships, but not just romantically, but also business relationships, friendships, all of it, right? He gives a whole speech in the middle of the episode about how technology keeps changing, but the one thing that people will always need is human connection. So being in that business is you know, everlasting, effectively. That comes after he tells a story about how his father used to develop film and refused to change with the times, and then by the time he did try to sell digital cameras, it was too late because everyone had phones that could do it, which wouldn't have been that long ago, relatively speaking. Maybe a decade. Well, maybe just a bit over a decade. I suppose it depends when you count phones being good enough as cameras, because I wouldn't say that the first phones that had cameras were good enough to replace actual cameras, but obviously once you get to smartphones, they're like, okay, these are actually good enough for what most people are using cameras for. So anyway, the point being is that it very much... So this idea of like two partners who were friends, rifting apart, obviously it doesn't mirror Finch and Ingram exactly, because one of them didn't try and kill the other one, but thematically it felt like it made a lot of sense why we were getting these flashbacks in this episode. you've got this idea of one of them being a bit more moral, but also being a bit more interested in the secrecy of Finch, and he brings that up a couple of times, and it's almost like he is kind of not the Finch of the two, because in some ways he's the Ingram of the two as well, depending on how you look at it. But it's a fun little play between the two plots. But I think also what I just talked about there, that speech about technology changes, about human connections are the things that are going to be forever, right? I think that's interesting to think about that in the context of the machine, because the machine, as Ingram even says in one of the flashbacks in this episode, is the most advanced piece of technology that's ever been built, at least at the time of creation. And I think that little speech makes me think a couple of things. It makes me, especially in conjunction with Ingram saying that line, is that won't always be true. Is that that's telling me that possibly down the line, sometime in this show, someone else will build a similar but better version, or something that's stronger. Not necessarily better in terms of, like, when I say better, I just mean more technologically advanced and more powerful. I don't mean like when I think of like a rival machine, I think of one that is cold, and because I think at this point I would be quite safe in saying that the machine is very implied to have some context of understanding the world around it, and seems to care about Finch, seems to care about people to some extent. We've seen little hints of that throughout. I would think like a villain machine, if you want to call it that, would be one that's more powerful but is cold and is just completely devoid of any human emotion. But that also plays into the other side of that little speech. It's not just that technology always gets outdated, but human connections are always a real thing. So the idea that the machine might actually stay relevant because it cares about the people in the world, or at least some of them, if not all of them, then that will always make it some way relevant and changes it from being technology into being a person. I think all of these things play very nicely with the overall idea of the machine and what we've been building since the start of the show. So this is another great example of one of these plots, which is very fun on the surface level because Reese is getting annoyed at this rich guy and all of his stupid antics. But it's sneakily saying a lot of little things, or pointing out a lot of little things about paving the road forward for where we might be going thematically with the machine, and stuff like that. So I really appreciate that's what makes the writing in this show strong to me. Is that even when you have a seemingly very standalone episode like this, you've got just all these little things that are tying into the overall narrative, whether it be a literal plot level sometimes, sure, but almost always on a thematic level, and really works. I can't compliment the show at times enough for doing that. So yeah, that was the main thing, and the flashbacks. There's also a little bit of Carter and Fusco to talk about. Carter mostly just does some errands for Finch over the phone, fingerprints and whatnot, but she is looking into that murder that she got the tip from the murder of the Internal Affairs. Infernal Affairs is a Hong Kong movie that The Departed was based on, and I like it more than The Departed. I'm not here today to shit on The Departed necessarily. I said it by accident, so I'm giving my thoughts. This was interesting because Fusco's looking at her like, look into this, and he asks her a little bit about it, and she's taking it very seriously because two cops like died, or well, she didn't know for sure they died, but they disappeared and no one's even found bodies. That's very suspicious. She's even doing some of the work in secret in the interrogation room where no one can see what she's doing. And Fusco, and I was thinking this just before he started sort of trying to, as I was thinking, it would probably be good for him to kind of open up and talk about exactly what happened. Because he's not just, as much as Simmons is threatening to pin this all on him, I mean, he didn't actually kill anyone here, right? At least not that I remember. My memory's vague of this. I remember him going out into the woods and I remember all that stuff, but I don't think Fusco is completely guilty of what anyone's going to accuse him of here. But he tries to actually open up and talk about some of his past to Carter. He wants to try and get some of it off his chest. And she actually shoots him down very, very quickly and says she doesn't want to hear any of that. She doesn't want to be burdened with any of that because, look, you've got this past. You've said you've changed, and I'm choosing to trust you that you've changed, right? And that we do good work together now. But, you know, if any of those things ever come back to haunt you, I'm not going to cover for you because, you know, she's still an honest cop. And it kind of shoots him down, and I felt bad for Fusco in the moment because I think fundamentally the thing that relates to what she's looking into is a bit more. There's a lot more context for it, right? I mean, he was also doing something for Reese and Finch at the time, if I remember correctly, but it's not as clear cut. But he's clearly feeling worried, and I think I like the idea that from a character perspective, Fusco is actually maybe more concerned of how Carter might think of him if the story that Simmons wants to say about all this stuff is the one that's believed. I think in some level, Fusco at this point really, really cares about Carter's respect. And I don't think he wants her to look at him like he's a bad guy. I think in some ways that this is someone he can look at and be like a sort of moral compass for him. And I don't think he wants to disappoint her. And I think there's like an element of that here, which is really kind of cool. It kind of sells the friendship, which Carter even says that they're probably friends. But, you know, interesting little tidbit there for this development with those two. So, yeah. No, really solid episode. Like, it's another great standalone episode with a lot of thematic ties to what generally is going on with the larger scope of the show. So, very cool. And we're in 2013 now, which makes sense because we had the mid-season break between a couple of the recent episodes, but I think today was the first time I noticed it when it came up saying 2013. I went, oh, okay. It's interesting that if I finish this show next year, and I might, because I think I will, because I started season 2 before the start of this year, so I should be somewhere in season 4 by the end of the year, I think. Meaning I'll finish in 2025. What am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say that by the time I finish in 2025, the show itself will be on 2015? No, maybe on 2016. I was trying to say that by the time I finish, it might be a decade of real time since the show ended, but I actually don't know. It may be a year off still. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Just me wasting brain cells for no reason. Thank you very much for joining me. Hopefully you've enjoyed my rambles on this person of interest, and look forward to the next one. If you enjoy my thoughts, please do hit the like button. It helps out a bunch. It's free. It's just a click, and YouTube annoyingly really puts a lot of stock in it with sharing videos out to more people and fresh eyes. So please do hit the button. If you want to go above and beyond, you can go over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, help keep the lights on, and get a few bonus things here or there. Mostly for stuff over in the movie channel, because there's a lot of movie podcasts that get bonus episodes and things like that on the Patreon. So check out Mail Fuzz Movies if you haven't, see if you're interested in that stuff. As far as other TV shows, obviously I'm working through X-Files right now. I'm on season 2 of that. Working through Twilight Zone. I'm on season 5 of that. I'm almost done with that show. Believe it or not, that's taken a while. But thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?